Greetings and welcome to the holliest and jolliest of episodes of Genre Grinder. I'm Gabe, and with me today is first-time co-host Daniel Baldwin. Daniel, tell us about yourself.
Putting me on the spot. Okay.
Yeah.
I am based out of West Virginia. The accent might give that away. I've been doing film writing online for probably about a decade and a half. And I have my own blog site called the Schlocketeer. I haven't really updated it lately, but hopefully I'll have some stuff up by the time this episode goes live somewhere. And I've known Gabe for a long time over the internet. Happy to be here.
I invited Daniel here today because he's my friend and he knows a thing or two about scary movies. But I also, he has a rich West Virginia accent, as you can hear. And this podcast is sorely lacking in rich accents. I've tried having on people from Chicago and Boston and Maryland and Jersey. Here in the Midwest, I even have our friend Luana in Belgium. And all of them have disappointed me with their lack of thick accents. So thank you, sir, for adding some color to my colorless little podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about killer Santa Claus movies, or just killer Santa movies. And I want to stress that we're talking about killer Santa Claus movies, not Christmas-themed horror movies, which this falls under that. But Christmas-themed horror is a surprisingly broad subject that I can probably milk for several episodes. So I wanted to get specific and leave myself open for future seasonal things, which for some reason I haven't done in the 2 years I've been doing the podcast. I've just have never really, I kind of forgot, or 3 years now, I kind of forgot that you're supposed to do seasonal things during holidays. But, killer Santa movies, been around for a while. I guess the first actual feature film that I know of would be the opening section of Freddie Francis's Tales from the Crypt from 1972 as one of those Amicus anthology movies. But it's become a really popular subgenre. There's like 2 a year lately. I don't know when that happened, but we're going to cover 4.5, we'll say, more classic titles here. And we're beginning with the first feature-length film about a murderous Santa I could find. And it is Louis Jackson's Christmas Evil, or if we're pressing the pun here, Christmas Eve L. The original title is You Better Watch Out, and this was released in 1980. And by going in chronological order like we usually do here on Genre Grinder, we're unfortunately starting with the best movie. We're not building up to the best movie this time. We're just starting right off the bat with the good shit. You had seen this before, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, I've seen it quite a few times, actually. I think I first watched it, if I had to, it was sometime in the last decade. I can't remember who put out the Blu-ray.
It was Vinegar Syndrome.
Okay, so it was probably an early Blu-ray release for them then, because I know.
It was.
But I had picked it up then, just because I'd always been curious about it, and I think I got it in a sale and absolutely fell head over heels in love with it. Like you said, it is the best of the bunch, and even just taking Christmas horror as a whole, it's definitely one of my favorite films out of that bunch.
Yeah, it's not as notorious or controversial as Silent Night, Deadly Night, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I think that if you take someone like my age and younger, you're a little bit younger than me, I think that Silent Night, Deadly Night is the first one that pops into mind, because that was kind of a big deal when we were young. This one sort of built its cult over the years. It was not a particularly talked about movie, because it didn't drive a bunch of controversy for having a killer Santa Claus in it. But I think the thing that makes it great is that it is it's surprisingly thoughtful and funny, and it has this poignancy to it, but it's still very grimy and exploitation-y when you come down to it. It's sort of a perversion of the kind of saccharine uplift movies we get from classic Christmas movies, but it's also genuinely sweet where it counts, and that makes it feel like all the filthier when it does act transgressively. It's about a guy named Harry. The letterbox thing says, a toy factory worker, mentally scarred as a child upon learning Santa Claus is not real, suffers a nervous breakdown after being belittled at work, and embarks on a Yuletide killing spree. Now, that is the simple way to put it. In reality, it's that he is upset at the fact that other people are not taking Christmas as seriously as he is. And so it's sort of sold as a slasher movie, which is misleading because it's sort of a slasher movie, but it has a pretty low body count and there's not a lot of jump scares or anything like that. And though the bloodshed that's in it is pretty graphic, it's also pretty minimal. The posters at the time were comparing it to Halloween and Friday the 13th, but it was technically shot before Friday the 13th was released, so it couldn't have really been inspired by it, but it does sort of recreate your classic slasher movie rituals, like the tragic, pre-credit flashback that sets up all the killer's motivations, and it's got these sort of fetishistic shots of his weapons, but it also sort of eschews the whole whodunit angle that coincides with a lot of those early Friday the 13th era slashers, those kind of post-Halloween ones. There's this occasionally sense that Lewis Jackson, the director, is poking fun at the idea of a slasher movie, but I think that this is just sort of a coincidental side effect of the movie he really wants to make. It feels too genuine for me to I don't know. Did you think that this would be considered a spoof movie on any level?
No, not really. I think maybe part of that comes from the fact that maybe Lewis Jackson views Harry as pathetic in his attempts to punish who he views as the wicked, and because he's a pretty emasculated character throughout, even as he finally snaps. So I think maybe it's more that than it is parody or satire. Although I guess I can see how you could read it as such in hindsight, but circa 1980, not really. I don't think.
Not really. I mean, it's more like that. That it has comedy in it, I guess, mm-hmm. And less that it's making fun of a kind of movie. The more that it's just sort of a dark comedy. For the record, he claims he was inspired to make the movie while he was very stoned, which kind of makes sense given the tone it has and the sort of all over the place tone it has. And then also, I think the title is misleading. That they should have stuck with "Better Watch Out" or one of the other titles, because Harry isn't evil, and I think that even though, like you said, he's pathetic, I think the movie kind of sympathizes with him, or at least kind of wants the audience to sympathize with him. He has good intentions, which is in direct contrast to the Silent Night, Deadly Night killer, who again we'll talk about in a minute, but is this young, handsome, season-hating psychopath. Harry is this kind of pathetic loner, an older guy who just loves Christmas. That's his. He's decided that Christmas is his personality. He does stuff like he spies on neighbor children with binoculars, and he keeps giant ledgers of their behavior, working out which have been naughty and which have been nice. Which is sort of already, I think, subverting this sort of transgressive joke that Santa Claus is a pedophile, because Harry is very much not a pedophile. He is this pure being that just wants everybody to behave and appreciate Christmas. And I think that he's actually disgusted by sexuality, but his interest in children is obviously very unhealthy. And it gets to the point where we're at the audience are pretty sure he's going to kill one child who particularly offends him. And I think the other good comedy aspect is the fact that he is the district head for a literal toy manufacturer, and that he's working with a bunch of unionized guys who are only in it for the paychecks and not in it for the love of toys, which is, it kind of makes him this pathetic Santa character even more than a crazy person who embodies Santa. He is sort of like, what if Santa was existing in 1970s New Jersey and trying to have a workshop, and how that would work.
Yeah, he's really interesting, especially in conjunction with the other Killer Santa movies that we're going to talk about, and then even more beyond those, because in most cases, the killers are just wearing the costume because it's easier to move about on holiday, or because there's some sort of deep-seated hatred for the holiday and Santa that's kind of fueling them, like they snapped, like the Silent Night, Deadly Night killers. But with Harry really just wants to be Santa Claus. He's
Yeah.
doing it because he loves Christmas, and it's almost more of a comedy of errors because he doesn't really set out to murder people. It just kind of happens along the way.
It's some of the kills are almost accidental, whereas the rest of them are pretty spur of the moment kind of things.
Yeah.
He's never stalking anybody like Michael Myers. I think he's sort of akin to the kind of, I don't know if you call them anti-villains, that like Travis Bickle and Taxi Driver, Frank Zito and Maniac.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
he's just one of these sad losers who find those guys are sad losers who find purpose in murder, basically. And in a way, Travis Bickle is sort of punishing people based on his moral expectations of society. But unlike Bickle, this isn't a thinly veiled excuse for violence. It's just sort of violence happens because Harry, capital B, believes in the spirit of Christmas, and is upset that other people do not.
Yeah, back to the child watching thing. In any other movie on this list or the long list of axe wielding Santa murderers, it would be an intent to actively punish the children. But before everything goes wrong, all Harry really wants to do is drop off nice presents to all the kids in his neighborhood, like
Right.
dressed up as Santa innocently.
Even when
Yeah.
he scares the naughty kid, he kind of realizes he's taken it too far and freaks out and runs away.
Yeah, he's watching and logging all of these children's behaviors. Massive red flag. And he also
Yeah.
decides that he wants to sneak into all of their homes on Christmas. Another massive red flag. But there's an air of innocence behind all of it that is really lacking in pretty much any other film of this similar type. I mean, there's a few Killer Santa movies, like Violent Night or Fat Man or Dick Moss's Saint, where Santa is the actual killer, be it a
Right.
good one like David Harbour or a bad one like Goldberg in Santa's Sleigh. But Christmas Evil really stands alone in the fact that if things went Harry's way, he would have just delivered all the presents that night, had a big old smile on his face and the best Christmas ever, and then started planning to do it again next year. And that would have been it.
And a lot of this comes down to Brandon Mogart. If I assume you pronounce it Mogart, his performance is very good, and it's also the only one of these movies we're going to be talking about where the Santa is the whole point of the movie, is the character study of the killer Santa. It's not just an excuse to do other things. I mean, honestly, it's almost hard to call it a horror movie. I hate to get into that sort of studio discussion of we can't advertise things as a horror movie, but it's like a very dark comedy that is using horror elements. I mean, I guess I should say that the kill scenes are pretty nasty. There's one part where he stabs the guy in the eye, and it doesn't last as long as the splinter scene from Lucio Fulci's Zombie, but it's just as juicy, I would say.
Yeah, it's pretty gnarly.
Yeah. I think the best scene in the whole movie is when he's already killed somebody and the word is out around town to keep your eye out for Santas because they might be armed and dangerous. And a group of children who doesn't know this approach him and it's at nighttime with their parents. And the kids are sort of into it, but then a dad whips out a switchblade. And so the kids huddle around Santa to protect him. And this
Yes.
leads to a tussle. And a little girl takes the knife away from her father and hands it to Harry, who then stabs the dad while trying to get away. This leads the parents to like literally pick up torches and chase him into the night like a Frankenstein movie.
It's wonderful because it really leans into the purity of Santa as a myth. When push comes to shove, the children decide to save Santa over their own parents.
Yeah, I mean, they believe Santa over their own parents, and it doesn't hurt that the parents are whipping out switchblades at Santa. That's not a great look. You could look into this and sort of intellectualize it a little bit, I think. The part of the satire to me is the idea that none of this has anything to do with Christianity. Harry is not a Bible thumper. He is a Christmas thumper. And I like the way that he has replaced that kind of religious zealotry with this sort of intense love of kitschy consumer mythology that surrounds a holiday. That, the whole Santa thing, this is one of those factoids that everybody always says like it's a new one, but like Santa as we know him hasn't been around that long. It's a pretty newish concept, and it is built on American consumerism. And I think that there is a little bit of that in there. And this is, I hesitate to assign too much social commentary to this sort of low budget exploitation movie, but John Waters has said basically the same thing about what he thinks Lewis was setting out to do. So I think if John Waters is agreeing with me, I feel comfortable saying this.
Just say
There's
that's
also
a pretty good metric.
Yeah, exactly. There's also a sequence where he gets Harry sort of set off, where he is sickened by the naked greed of the company he works for when he discovers that there is this toy drive, but it's a sham to drum up goodwill, and that the employees are expected to cover the actual cost of the toy drive. And it's that point that he decides to steal a bunch of toys and deliver them. So I mean, he's in any other movie that would be a heroic thing like that. Like if you made this movie in the 50s, it would just be Jimmy Stewart doing the exact same thing minus the murdering, because he found out that the company he worked for was corrupt and greedy. Like what do you call the message movies of the 30s and 40s? It almost fits that role, but then it's also a Killer Santa movie.
Yeah, with a slight tweak. I mean, if Harry were just a little more competent, this would be a Hallmark movie where someone turns themselves into Santa Claus by becoming a sort of Robin Hood in their small Christmassy town.
Right. It's like almost. It's interesting that the Tim Allen Santa Claus movies are kind of similar. Like they're like equal opposite, where they're like these family movies where a guy doesn't want to be Santa, and heartwarming things happen. Where this is a horror movie where a guy does want to be Santa and bad things happen. There is a guy, an Englishman named Andy Park, who is the self-proclaimed Mr. Christmas. And I don't think that this movie is based on him, obviously, because this was a newer thing. But he attempted to celebrate Christmas every day for more than a decade. And it nearly killed him because of the caloric intake of his nightly Christmas feasts. And he went completely broke because you can't afford to eat and celebrate like that every day. And I saw footage of him on a Channel 5 documentary. And in a lot of ways, he's scarier than Harry, because, you take away the murder part. Harry is still sort of understands that not everybody loves Christmas like he does. This real world man is sort of driving himself to death and poverty in a way worse. Like Harry has a job and Harry has a daily life. He doesn't seem to have any friends, but he honestly seems less psychotic than this real world person.
That's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
Maybe without the murder, that's where Harry would have ended up if everything went right. But
if he had the funds. I mean, he does have a brother that cares about him. That is something that happens, and he does like his nephews a lot. I'm trying to remember who plays the brother.
Oh, it's Jeffrey DeMunn.
Jeffrey DeMunn, yeah, Frank Darabont favorite, Jeffrey DeMunn. There's also a Blink and You Miss It cameo from Mark Margolis, who is Hector Salamanca in Breaking Bad, and in like a million Darren Aronofsky movies.
You also have bit parts from Raymond J. Barry, and then Tim Allen's Home Improvement co-star Patricia Richardson. They're in there.
Yes, that's right. And talk about Blink and You Miss It. Like, I knew she was in it, and I still missed her the first time I saw it. And this was sort of a video nasty in the UK. It was included on the Director of Public Prosecutors Section 3 list, which meant it wasn't technically prosecuted under any obscenity laws, but it could still be confiscated if there was a raid. You just wouldn't get you couldn't as a person who owned it be in legal trouble. It would just get taken away from you like contraband, which I guess comes down to the fact that there was a big, again, we're about to get into Silent Night, Deadly Night. There was a big moral panic about Killer Santas, which I just saw Fox News did the other day. Uh,
Oh,
just as we're recording this, like I think just yesterday or the day before, Fox News had a whole bit about, I can't remember what, there's a Christmas themed slasher movie coming out, and I can't remember which one it is. And they'd had a whole bit on there about the moral decay that would allow a Christmas themed slasher movie, as if we haven't had them for 40 years now.
I know which one it is. It's a Wonderful Knife,
Yeah,
which
that's the one.
played theaters earlier in the month, and of course it'll be on streaming by the time this comes out. But I believe it hits Shudder on December 1st.
Great advertising, you know.
Oh yeah,
I wonder if Fox has a. I guess it would end up on Tubi if Fox had, or Hulu. Hulu. No, I think Fox only has Tubi these days. I don't know. It would be a Tubi original if Fox themselves was trying to sell it, I guess.
that's such a playing the hits, controversy sounding board that if I were making a similar movie, I would almost intentionally send them a copy just so that they would goose the marketing for me on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotta sell at least a couple streaming copies. And I guess my thoughts closing out on this one is I just wanted to mention that Jackson's career was extremely short lived. He had made one softcore porn title called The Deviates in 1970. And then in 1974, he made a sort of homemade horror spoof called The Transformation: A Sandwich of Nightmares. And neither of these are available on any format. And then you fast forward to 1980 and he does Christmas Evil and then he disappears. I wouldn't say that like he is some like lost master of cinema, but he clearly had an interesting voice. And it is too bad that this was the end of his career as a filmmaker.
That's one of those situations where you mourn the loss of what he might have given us had he continued, but also, and he may not have viewed it this way himself, but when you kind of mic drop a, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, masterpiece like this, there's nowhere to go but down. So maybe it was good that he closed out here.
Yeah, he could have been like Donald Farmer or, those people who are still to this day releasing 6 shot on digital horror movies to the streaming market every year. Do you have any other thought?
Yeah, I was going to say there's 2 more thoughts. One I'll hold towards the end of our conversation, our overall conversation. Okay. But the other one, another interesting nugget is that, of course, Harry, our killer Santa himself, Brandon McGart, is the father of Fiona Apple.
That's right. That's a factoid I forgot and I didn't have in my notes, but that is true. I would love to know her thoughts on it. That would be so funny if it is some weird coincidence I ended up being in a room with Fiona Apple and I would remember to ask her this one random fact. Did you ever watch your dad's movie? It's kind of a masterpiece. The one where he kills people as Santa Claus.
And then she'll reveal that she watches it every Christmas Eve.
Yeah. I mean, she seems like the type, right? I mean, yeah, she seems pretty cool. All right. So the second and a half here are Silent Night, Deadly Night, 1984. This is Charles Sellier. This is not to be confused with the Silent Night, Bloody Night from 1972, which is not a Killer Santa movie.
Pretty good,
or it's a really interesting movie that I think I might end up covering on I'm thinking about doing a weird Christmas horror episode as the next time I do a Christmas themed one, because there are some really weird movies that some don't even have anything to do with Christmas that ended up being sold as Christmas movies. It's very strange. There's also a 2012 movie by Stephen C. Miller called Silent Night, and there's an upcoming John Woo movie that by the time I can't remember when that comes out, but pretty soon, maybe by the time this goes live, that will be available. Also called Silent Night. And again, this is the movie I think most people my age, I was born in 1980, so I'm just, functionally aware enough in 1984 to know that something is up with this movie, this Killer Santa Claus movie. and it created so much controversy that outweighs the quality of the actual film by such a degree that it's kind of funny. It's something that happens a lot in England, where you get these video nasties that are just the dumbest Jess Franco movie that he made over a weekend and didn't give a fuck about, and somehow it ends up being this like, oh my god, this band masterpiece, The Devil Hunter, and then you see The Devil Hunter and you're like, what the fuck was that? Silent Night, Deadly Night is like almost the American equivalent of that. But as someone who doesn't particularly like it, I can understand the love behind this one. But I still think it's kind of a textbook example of an unremarkable movie finding this really lasting cult success because of controversy. So just to like set the stage, Sellier, who is a television producer by trade, he and his cohorts decide to jump on the holiday slasher bandwagon, sort of ignoring the fact that Bob Clark's Black Christmas is the first slasher, the holiday themed slasher that predating Halloween. But I don't think people put that together at the time. So he was trying to do Halloween, but with Christmas. His distributor was TriStar, who opted to release the film during Christmas. And they did so with a very evil Santa forwarded ad campaign. And then they were also unfortunate enough to release the film in 1984 when the outcry against so-called dead teenager movies was peaking. And an interesting fact that I didn't realize until now is that this opened against Nightmare on Elm Street. So it didn't do very well. The controversy didn't actually sell tickets. The controversy ended up chasing distributors away. So there was TV spots with an axe murdering Santa in them, and parent groups got up in arms. And I'm not sure if any other horror movie in my lifetime has garnered such extreme protest response. This is the kind of thing that's usually reserved for religious movies, like The Life of Brian, Last Temptation of Christ, Dogma. Those had huge campaigns against them. And then, before our lifetimes, there's some porn got that. But I don't think there's anything quite to this level in my lifetime that was just horror related. I mean, even the gnarliest horror films got sort of lukewarm protests by fringe groups that most people could ignore. The protest campaign basically founded the lobbying group Citizens Against Movie Madness. Phil Donahue devoted an entire hour of his daytime talk show to this movie. And the CBS Evening News had a headline story. But I think the most dubious thing is that Siskel and Ebert on their show, I can't remember if this is their PBS. It would have been their PBS show at the time. They literally ran down the list of credits and shamed every single person name by name on the air as part of their show. I think that's still the most embarrassing thing that Siskel and Ebert ever did. And Siskel and Ebert did some pretty embarrassing things over their career. Anyway, it was pulled from theaters. The ads were pulled from air. Essentially ruined Sellier's career. And a lot of the actors struggled to find work afterwards. It ruined everybody's life. But, every self-respecting horror fan had to see it. So it became a really big video hit.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, Christmas Evil and especially the original Black Christmas have a good amount of popularity now, but they weren't nearly as popular even 20 years ago. And right. I kind of wonder if that or even less notoriety might have been the fate of Silent Night, Deadly Night without all of the hullabaloo around it. Because there's other Killer Santa or Killer Christmas movies from the early 80s that, horror fans know, like To All a Good Night or Don't Open Till Christmas, but no one else has heard of. And I suspect that probably would have been the case with this one if they hadn't raised such a stink. Of course, like you said, absolutely. It got yanked from theaters so fast that it didn't really make all that much money, which kind of feeds into the way part 2 is the way it is. But, the notoriety on the news plus the TV ads that everyone probably at least saw if they didn't see the film itself, I'm sure that's sold like a buttload of VHS tapes, which also wouldn't have happened without any of the, controversy around anything.
Yeah, and I didn't look into it, but I have a feeling that a lot of the VHS money didn't go to the filmmakers either. That probably they had not. They had weird rules as far as royalties went back in those early days of VHS. So I'm going to read off the plot again from Letterbox here. Little Billy witnesses his parents being brutally murdered by Santa. Years later, when he has to fill in for an absent in-store Santa Claus, his childhood trauma materializes once again. It's kind of funny watching this back to back with Christmas Evil, where the inciting childhood event is he sees his mom and dad dressed as Santa, not knowing it's his dad, groping each other, and that's enough to just drive him mad. Whereas Silent Night, Deadly Night, I feel like the just absolute sheer degree of horrible things that happens to the kid is it justifies his behavior later in the movie in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's bad enough that I'm kind of surprised he lasted as long as he did without snapping and murdering someone.
Right. And also, unlike I should say this comes into play in the sequel more, but unlike Christmas Evil, which is designed to be a dark comedy, this is sort of a serious horror movie that is very tone deaf. So it's easy to say it is unintentionally funny. I think there are lots of things that are supposed to be funny, but there is a lot of just it's not even that the performances are bad. Some of them are, but it's just that the things that the actors have to say and do are so weird and just off-putting that it kind of makes you laugh no matter what you can do. And I think the silliest thing is that the original script must have been 600 pages because it's like a miniseries worth of plot. and I guess it's telling that Sellier worked in television, but he spends roughly a third of the runtime rolling out reasons why the mad killer has gone mad, which is something like what do you got? Got the burning. The burning gives you 3 minutes at the beginning of the movie where we find out there's this guy who is mistreated and some kids burn him. And that's all we need to know about why he's gone mad. Or Friday the 13th, kid died drowning. That's all we need to know is, and then his mom went crazy because the people weren't watching him who were supposed to watch him. But this has not only his family murdered, but then it's like, again, a good third of the film is him in the orphanage, which is run by like iron-fisted nuns, just being traumatized by things that happen in the orphanage, and the fact that nobody really knows how to deal with his trauma, and it just builds and builds and builds and builds.
I was when I was revisiting this, for this episode, my son was walking in and out of the room, and he caught enough early on to know how traumatized Billy was by Santa Claus and Christmas. And he walked in right when the store owner makes Billy dress up as Santa, and he just said, "Oh no!"
I mean that, and I think that's a joke that is intended and lands really well. I'll say, as someone who doesn't really like this movie, that's a good gag that we know we have a good solid 45 minutes of film telling us why he should not be around Christmas, and then he is told, "Hey, you need to dress up like Santa." It's a good gag. I think, go on.
I was just saying, I like this movie a bit more than you. I will not call it good.
Right.
But there's a huge level of sincerity to the badness and the amateur, filmmaking and especially acting that I find charming, if that makes any sense. Same goes for part two. We get a lot of similar films these days that try to be this, whether specifically a Killer Santa movie or a Michael Myers knockoff or anything else, that think they can be bad on purpose and miss the point that the wrong, or I shouldn't say wrong, I should say the lack of accepted writing and filmmaking styles that are on display in these films. It was unintentional. They didn't know they weren't doing it the quote unquote proper way. So, there's an innocence and sincerity to it as opposed to kind of a crass, ha ha ha, we're making a bad movie crap that we get a lot of today. So I find it charming on that level, and it makes it way more entertaining to me, whether they mean it to be or not.
I think it's also a case of this particular movie is trying very hard to be mean-spirited
Mm-hmm.
and fucked up, and it's sort of it wants to say, hey guys, look at this movie and how shocking it is. But again, it like you say, it's a genuine thing. It's not, they're trying to make something that's shocking people. And again, they're doing it kind of in the wrong way, but there is something to be said for that sincerity as well. Like, there is so much unnecessary character melodrama that's just there to drive home how fucked up the situation is. Like we were saying, Christmas Evil, you could tweak it and it would just become a Hallmark movie. This, if you tweaked it, would feel like in the 80s and early 90s, but mostly the 80s, there were these made for TV movies about troubled youth that would usually play during the day. And it reminds me of those. Or something like, I can't remember the name of the Tom Hanks movie where he goes crazy playing Dungeons and Dragons.
It's like Mazes and Monsters or something like
yes,
that.
Thank you. Mazes and Monsters. This feels like if you tweak the horror stuff a little bit out of it, this is like Mazes and Monsters kind of thing, where we're just like it's just a melodrama. Like, look what goes wrong when you traumatize children. But like, the filmmakers didn't do any research as to how childhood trauma actually works. And they really just wanted to make a mean-spirited Christmas movie. And that's why I think the advertising wasn't a mistake by any means. Like, they knew they were doing exploitation.
Oh yeah.
But it got away from them. But I mean, man, you could really, it's a really strange mix of things that actually, I should say, grew on me a little bit this time. The way that you have these really pretty extreme killing scenes, which were censored for a long time. Even if you get it on Blu-ray, the uncut killing scenes are sourced from like a different print, so they kind of look like shit. Like, nobody, it's not like my Bloody Valentine, where they found in a closet somewhere, they found all the deleted footage and were able to remaster it so it looks acceptable. Like, this was just sort of thrown out. So there is, they thought through their kills in this case, which is more than you can say for a lot of bad slasher movies. So that's definitely a point in its favor. But the fact that it's flanked by all this ironic Christmas music and these really over the top melodramatic performances, and then like all the supporting characters are kind of normal people, especially the people he works with. They're sort of just normal people, and it heightens everything more that the adult Billy, who looks like he's 34. I think he's supposed to be 17, maybe, but he looks like a linebacker.
Of course, there's some stylistic elements from Black Christmas and Christmas Evil, just in terms of the way they approach the Christmassy nature of it all, that are still very much present in the horror genre today. But I would say, for better or worse, this is the most influential Christmas horror movie.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, I guess Black Christmas has been remade twice, but the remakes were really a very different movie.
Well, even with that, the 2006 remake, Black Xmas, is way more of a Silent Night, Deadly Night movie than it is a Black Christmas movie. Like, and it's got a similar amount of heaped trauma on as the backstory. And it didn't occur to me until we were just now talking about it, but Rob Zombie's Halloween remake, with the way it, tacks a prequel on to the start of its Cliff Notes version of the Carpenter film, all of that is kind of very Silent Night, Deadly Night as well, with the heaped amounts of trauma upon little Michael.
I suppose so. Bad thing happens during a holiday, and he ends up in a insane asylum instead of an orphanage, which is probably what Billy should have ended up in, an insane asylum.
Yeah.
And the fact that he goes from this cute little kid to this fucking pro wrestler sized man. Exactly. I mean, he's not quite as big. He's not quite as giant as Michael Myers is in the zombie films, but he's a big, big boy. I think that as I was watching this, I noted that this is actually one of Patrick's favorite slasher movies.
I can see that.
And I noted that he actually loves the movie Romano Scavellini's Nightmare, which I think it's released here as Nightmares in a Damaged Brain.
Mm-hmm.
He also really likes that one, and I realized that they have a lot in common. They're these sort of trashy slasher movies that are failed attempts at serious psychodrama, and are really focused on the how hard it is to what makes someone into a killer. But I think the Nightmare wins for just being purely tasteless and gory as hell.
Yeah, that the incest gives that one an edge on this one.
Yeah, that one just makes you feel dirty. This one is a kind of exploitation film that is dirty, but it doesn't make you feel dirty watching it. I mean, I guess some people might feel dirty watching it. It feels like you're having fun. This would be a good party movie. I imagine it works really well at a party.
Yeah, it probably would. Yeah. You were talking about it feeling like an entire miniseries with a plot crammed into it. Obviously you'd have to tone down the sleaze a little bit, but you could probably redo this as a Lifetime miniseries if you wanted to. I don't think you could do that with Nightmare.
No, absolutely. I mean, God, can you imagine? Like Nightmare would be like you could turn Nightmare into like a Prestige Channel miniseries.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be ultra serious. Hire some actor who really wants an Emmy nomination, and then all the critics would hate it. I made myself a note. I think that there's a Suspiria homage in this movie that I never caught before. There's part where a teen boy is thrown through a window, and we see the aftermath, and he is positioned in a way with glass in his face that it looks like the skylight, the woman who's crushed by the skylight in the beginning of Suspiria. I mean, it's so specifically framed that I just get the feeling that it was someone on set, maybe not the director, but someone on set was like, "Oh, we should make this look like Suspiria."
I clocked that when I watched it, and then I forgot about it. But they don't frame it once; they frame it twice because you get a second close up on the body after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like Suspiria was a super obscure movie at the time either. So I think it was on purpose. And this also has a great soundtrack. Just it's sort of halfway between ironic and genuine. It's composed by Morgan Ames, and it's performed by him and Lee Montgomery. Or also, I should say, Lee Montgomery, Doug Thiel, Carmen Twilly, and Dee Dee Denard. And I think I would describe this as a bar rock soundtrack. It sort of sounds like a bar group that wants to be the E Street Band, but just doesn't have the talent to get there. And that just adds this really great layer onto how strange so many little things that don't need to be strange are strange about this movie. I also got a bit of nostalgia rush out of all the toys on the shelves. Yeah, because 1984 was like prime toy time for me.
Yeah, I was paying attention to a lot of those this time around. And there's also a level of even with the Christmas decorations, because the stuff in Black Christmas and Christmas Evil, it's more classic, more ornate. And not so much stylish, but just more what you would think Christmas decorations would look like in those two films. Whereas this one, these are like the discount rack cheapo decorations that were very prevalent at the time. I remember seeing a lot of them when I was little, both in stores and at people's houses. And so there's a level of nostalgia there that just kind of worms its way in, if you're our age or older. Probably not so much with younger generations, because a lot of that stuff's sort of been phased out.
Yeah, you can always tell like it was put up by underpaid workers who didn't want to do it.
Mm-hmm. And some of the statuettes and little animatronic stuff look a little too creepy to be sold nowadays. But they were kind of the norm. Yeah, there
were some fucked up. The little animatronic Santas were fucked up, man. I remember them really scaring me as a kid. Did not like them.
And there's some twisted, uncanny valley nature to that stuff.
Yeah, it's always moving. It has this placid smile, and they're always moving in the same pattern over and over again, which is just something creepy about it. It's so they the director is talented enough to recognize the use in that. It actually kind of reminds me of the way Romero uses mannequins in Dawn of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
It's just these sort of like reminders of humanity that aren't human. So and then this is actually the first time I watched the first sequel.
Oh yeah.
And I did as I had never actually watched it. I of course knew about it because it's sort of a famously bad movie as opposed to a cult movie that's bad. This is like a Troll 2 level movie kind of. And I guess it was made. I don't know the exact backstory, but it was made using a lot of footage that they shot for the original movie because I guess the nun or the orphanage part was going to be much longer at some point, and they needed to reuse a bunch of that. So I had heard jokingly that it was half clip show, and I just assumed that was an exaggeration, but it literally almost to the minute is half clip show.
It's like 40 minutes.
Yeah, it's like I think it's 43 minutes. I looked, and the movie is just under 90, so it's almost exactly half of the movie. Like, I'm wondering if there was a producer somewhere saying you can't do more than half the movie as clips, and so they had someone there timing it so that they would still be under their contract. But it's narrated by Billy's adult brother, now adult brother Ricky, which he's supposed to be a teen, but again looks like he's in his 30s. But even if he's a teen, I think that means this movie's taking place in 1994 instead of 1985 or whatever, like the year after. And the guy playing Ricky, whose name I haven't written down, is so stiff and over the top at the same time. And the camp to it, the orphanage scenes don't do a lot to me with all the unused stuff. But then it turns into its own thing because he escapes and goes on a killing spree, and it's just so strange and so that I actually enjoyed this, I have to say.
Yeah, he Eric Friedman is the actor, and
That's okay.
he's giving the kind of performance that you would expect. I don't mean this in terms of quality. I need to qualify that here. He's
Yeah.
giving the kind of genre movie performance that you would have expected from Gary Oldman in the 90s. Just not even cranking it to 11, but up to like 38. It just playing to the rafters in a theater that's on the other side of the ocean, has no
Yeah.
idea how terrible he is, but that's what gives it its appeal.
Yeah, because it's so funny. He is not a tortured soul like Billy is in the original
No.
movie. He is pissed off and thinks very highly of himself and is insane, but it's like he seems to think of it as a virtue. My favorite scene is that he witnesses a near rape, and he runs the guy over with his car.
Oh God.
And which is already pretty funny, but I like the scene because it ends with the victim walking up, casually thanking him, and then just walking away. And it's the
Yes.
most surreal way to play that out. In any other movie, it would be like she would be very thankful and he would say something supportive, or he would kill her too as a twist. Like any normal
Right.
movie, you'd have one, but instead it's just this sort of casual, hey, thanks bud, and then they, again, to fill time, I guess, because there's so much filler in this movie, they just walk away from each other and we see them walking away from each other instead of cutting to the next scene immediately.
Like the first one, it's another one of those things where it's the absolutely quote unquote wrong thing to do with your story, but that's what makes
Yeah.
it interesting. And the recycled footage is hilarious because now it seems utterly ridiculous, but once you take into the context that the original was yanked from theaters pretty fast, I don't know I don't know exactly what point it hit VHS for rental, if it would have even been out by the time this hit theaters. But given the fact that most people wouldn't have seen the original, them recycling kind of the greatest hits reels from it kind of makes a bit of sense if they're trying to save money, because especially if you watch these back to back or even in close proximity, it just seems absolutely nuts But if once you factor in the fact that most people wouldn't have seen any of that footage, it's
Yeah.
just all going to play as awesome, I guess.
Yeah, I think I would suggest people just unless you're curious or you have a friend who's a huge fan of the original, I think it's almost worth just skipping straight to the sequel and watching it on its own. It's such a weird experience. And it does compact a not very great movie into 45 minutes or just under 45 minutes. Um there also is a really weird part where Ricky and his girlfriend go to a movie, and the movie is just scenes from the original Silent Night, Deadly Night. It's basically scenes of the Santa that murdered Ricky and Billy's family. uh, on his earlier, he tries to rob a liquor store, a convenience store, and shoots the place, and then runs off, and then his car breaks down, and it's like there's a point, like, I know they're just reusing footage and they're trying to be funny, but there's a point that, like, it's almost like a David Lynch movie.
Yes.
Like, is this really happening? Is this in his head? Is the world, like, has the world broken and we can't tell and like there's no difference between someone's real life and their movie prequel. It's so weird. I don't even think they're trying to be that meta about it. I think that that's what makes it Lynch-esque, is that I think it was just something they thought would be a funny idea.
Yeah.
I don't think it's an intellectualized thing.
I don't think so either. I think it's just mostly out of necessity, but it is absolutely insane. I mean, you've got 40 minutes of recycled footage from the movie. And, it's already crazy that even in regards to Mother Superior, we actually watch chunks of the performance of the actress from the original in the stock footage, and then have a completely different actress playing her in the finale.
Yeah.
That's already weird. But then when you recycle all that footage and then have Ricky go to the theater to watch a movie, and he's watching a movie about his family's life, and it's the same
Yeah.
footage, it's a bit of a mind melter. And I do like the reaction when the movie starts of him asking his date what it's about, and she's like, "Oh, it's about this guy who went crazy, dressed up like Santa, and killed a bunch of people," and he just shrieks out, "What?"
It's like the most human and sympathetic moment in for the character in the whole movie. It's like, you're like, yeah, I would say what too, mad killer guy.
But then he gets into it, and he's pretty much sitting there munching popcorn like Michael Jackson in the Thriller video.
Yeah. And the part where he kills a guy for talking too much is definitely supposed to be funny. That's a moment in the film that's supposed to be funny. I think that the thing that people will remember is that somehow became a meme is that while he's shooting people in the street, he kind of shouts "garbage day" at a guy in a really weird tone and then shoots him. And that particular clip has become a bit of a meme. If you've seen that clip, this is what it's from.
Yeah, there's a lot of memes like that, or just out of context clips from movies that when you watch the movie, it doesn't hold a candle to what you think it would be in your mind when you see the meme. That is not the case here.
Yeah, exactly. The lead up to that is just, there's like a little girl runs into his foot on her bike and apologizes, and he doesn't shoot her. He accepts her apology, and she goes back about her day and doesn't react to the fact that he's shooting people in the street.
Moving his eyebrows in a very Muppety manner.
Yeah. God, that would be great if someone took this footage and replaced him with a Muppet. That's like a great film school project right there. I should say the other Silent Night, Deadly Night sequels, there's 5 movies total. They diverge. 6? That's right, 6. They diverge a lot. I think the third one, I don't know if I've seen the third one. The third one is somewhat related, is it not?
Yeah, I haven't seen. I've seen bits and pieces of 3. I've never seen 4 or 5. I have seen 6.
4 is just a Brian Usna Screaming Mad George festival that happens to take place at Christmas time. I'm pretty sure Usna just bought the rights to the title, similar to like what he did with Return to Living Dead 3, except for in that case, that is sort of a sequel to Return of the Living Dead, but it really is just a zombie movie he wanted to make, and he wanted to use a title from another movie. But I recommend Initiation. It's a bizarre movie. I have
Yeah.
not seen The Toy Maker though.
I've heard nothing but good things about 4 and 5. 3 does
Yeah.
have Ricky as the main character, but it's
Okay.
Bill
So
Moseley, and he has a fishbowl on his head with an exposed brain in it. And Monty
shit.
Hellman directed the movie, so I'm really
That
interested in
sounds
it.
good.
But I haven't
well,
seen it.
I've watched the first two. I should find some time to rewatch Initiation and watch 3 and 5 at least. I don't know anything about 6. I just know it's there.
5 is, I believe, about an evil toy maker who makes toys that murder people. So it has more.
Yeah,
it's like
a puppet master type thing, isn't it?
And it's Mickey Rooney, which is hilarious because he was one of the very vocal opponents of the original film.
Right.
6 is the Stephen C. Miller movie Silent Night that you mentioned earlier. And
so it's a pseudo remake.
It's a very loose remake of the original. And then there was a movie that came out last year that was going to be another loose remake, but the I guess it was Joe Begus's Christmas Bloody Christmas, which is an animatronic Santa Claus that goes on a murder rampage. But I guess his discussions with the rights holders fell apart, and he just made it as a standalone feature. And it's actually pretty fun if you like his other movies. If you don't, you're not going to like it at all.
What are some of his other movies?
Almost Human, The Mind's Eye, VFW, and Bliss.
I have seen Almost Human. So sort of charmingly low budget, modern in a modern way. Oh.
Yeah, but it's a lot of ingenuity, a lot of great practical effects work. But writing wise, the characters are quite Rob Zombie-ish, if that makes any sense. So
yes, it does.
If that's a turn off, then you're probably not going to like this one. But if you do like that kind of stuff, it's actually pretty good.
Sounds a little like the Futurama Killer Santa robot.
Kind of.
Just from the description.
Well, the whole gag with it is that it's using technology that was developed for the military, but not purchased by the Pentagon or whatever. So they pivoted and made robot Santas for Christmas stores. And of course, this particular one malfunctions and goes back to its Killbot military programming and decides to slaughter everyone in the town.
So it's actually kind of like Short Circuit if he went bad instead of good and also was a Santa.
Yes. Short Circuit by way of Terminator. Yeah.
Awesome. Makes sense. Do you have anything else about the Silent Night, Deadly Night films?
Not really, but only in that it stands, for better or worse, they stand so tall that I would say a solid 90%, and I don't mean this in a mean way, but 90% of the low-budget crap Christmas horror movies that we get now are either still trying to be Silent Night, Deadly Night clones, or they're trying to ape Krampus. It's one or the other.
Yeah, it's like you have either Slasher Killer Santa or you have fantasy monster thing. Which actually, we're not covering any fantasy kind of monster movies in this. But there are some of those. We almost did. Is it just called Saint, I believe? And then there's Rare Exports is another kind of fantasy one.
Sort of. In that that one's more about the elves. And Santa never actually gets loose, but that's still the general idea. And then I already mentioned Santa's Sleigh with Bill Goldberg earlier, where you've got an actual evil mythological Santa on a rampage.
Yeah, and then Krampus, I feel kind of bad putting Krampus in this category because Krampus is kind of a different
it's
different idea.
Too off on its own.
Yeah. But we're going to change gears here and we're going to go away from strictly horror movies and we're going to cover a movie I had never seen. I'm going to use the title Deadly Games. when I'm talking about it mostly. This is from 1989. This is not to be confused with the unchristmassy 1982 slasher, also called Deadly Games, that was released semi-recently on Blu-ray by Arrow, which I didn't particularly like. But this is AKA Dial Code Santa Claus, and its original French title, which I'm going to butcher for here. I'm going to say Toi c'est un cinq Côte Père Noël, which is 3615 Code Santa. It's called Santa Claus, and it is sometimes known as Game Over. For some reason, Letterboxd has used Game Over as it chose that one. It's got a lot of things. This is a French film, as that French title might indicate, though I guess it could have been a Canadian film too. It was directed by, and I'm going to butcher this one too, René Manzor, and it is not, I would say, a 1/3 horror movie. It's sort of a unique mix of horror. It's slightly raunchy child's adventure, a genuine action movie, and then there's a lot of spoof in this. That's a serious spoof. Not like when we were sort of discussing Christmas Evil as a possible spoof. These are like, this is like, there's a couple sequences here that are like Naked Gun airplane level spoof of things, but very briefly. And just to set this one up, I actually wrote a plot out for this. The plot follows a young boy named Thomas who lives with his invalid grandfather, who we find out later has pretty bad diabetes, and his mother. And his mother, it wasn't clear to me exactly, but I believe she's the CEO of a big toy company.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a sort of junior disaster prepper. And he lives in this big mansion, and his grandfather and mother support his habit. And so he sort of sets up his play, like he sets up the house with traps, but it's really for play. It's to have fun. He dresses up like Rambo, and there's like a montage of him doing his Rambo thing, and then he has speakers that play war sounds, and he has little trap doors set up for the dog. But it's mostly for play. It's not really that he's preparing for the worst. He is just having fun. But all this comes in handy when his mom fires one of her company's street performing Santa Clauses. And that guy is already not in the best shape, and he figures out where she lives and goes to kill her family, though it's kind of inconsistent as to what his motivations are, and I'll talk about that more later. But the basic idea is Thomas defends the house, which again is really a more of a mansion, and protects his grandfather against the invader, and the invader is wearing his Santa outfit the whole time. Well, the mother hurries back to save him through a snowstorm. And some listeners might be hearing that and say, oh, that kind of sounds like Home Alone. And don't worry, that didn't escape the director's notice. And he apparently accused John Hughes and Chris Columbus of ripping him off. I don't know if he was being sarcastic or if like he was being very serious about this and like did the French thing where he spit on the floor after mentioning them. But it's such a funny movie that I get the feeling he was being sarcastic and that the interview sort of took him out of context. And what's funny is that if you disguise the release dates, I might have guessed that Home Alone came out first, and that this was partially making fun of and sort of building on Home Alone, because it's like this extreme escalation of the things you see happen in Home Alone. And there are so many like homages to Rambo First Blood, part 2 and stuff like that it feels like that was actually what they had in mind.
Yeah, the similarities are actually not in terms of actual scenes, but the plot similarity is kind of wild. Obviously this, like you said, it's drawing off of Rambo First Blood Part 2 and also Die Hard, but just by virtue of the fact that instead of being in the Nakatomi Plaza skyscraper, it's a kid in his huge home running around and away from someone who's ostensibly trying to kill him, but maybe not quite. Yeah, it'd make a hell of a double feature with the first Home Alone. I'll say that.
And the Home Alone angle would be the thing that if I was trying to sell this movie, I can't remember who put it out on Blu-ray. It might have also been Vinegar Syndrome.
I believe it was. Yeah.
I would, if I had to make a clip reel, I would mostly show those kinds of scenes. But a lot of the appeal for me personally is how strange and overly complex parts of the plot are. and how character focused it is. But the title Code Santa is a very ambiguous thing where the company that his mom works for is setting up a sort of call line to talk to Santa. But it seems like it's also an early internet computer program as well. Like you can I there's a scene where the boy is Thomas is helping his friend fix a computer game where you can talk to Santa. It's one of those things where it feels like the filmmakers had a lot of ideas, and this happens a lot in kid aimed genre movies, I've noticed, for some reason. But they have a lot of ideas and they aren't really sure how to gel them together, so they end up with just a lot of scenes that just sort of fit together. But that's what's kind of appealing about it, is how strange it is and how it sort of skirts the line between fantasy and reality. It's really like what's the movie called? Son of Rambo, the Garth Jennings movie.
Yeah.
But that movie contrasts the imaginary world with the real world, whereas this one, you can't really separate the two, because I think I think the fantasy is the real world. There's not like an indication that Thomas is seeing things in a certain way. And again, he's built his entire home up with the fantasy, so it doesn't really, like secret passages and stuff like that. It doesn't really. It is a fantasy, so that's the weird thing about it. Whereas again, Home Alone is not a fantasy movie. It's a movie that has like cartoonish violence in it, I suppose, but it's not a fantasy movie.
Right. There's real world problems in Home Alone. They're heightened, right, and the edges are sanded off, but they're still there. Whereas this, correct me if I'm wrong, do we ever see the kid not just running around the house acting like a lunatic? Like,
we just see him at his friend's house in that one scene.
That's right.
And that friend shows up again later. And again, it's like one of these things where they just had an idea and then they drop it, because the friend shows up and escapes the killer in a scene that I'm pretty sure is supposed to be a Shining homage, because the killer's like chasing him through hedges. He just disappears. Like, I'm like, oh, the kid's going to go call the cops, but he doesn't. He just disappears from the movie. So it's like they just had this go nowhere subplot with the friend. You take that and then you multiply that by the fact that it's this really beautiful movie.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
And there's a sort of irony in the idea of it looking like a Christmas movie. Like they use a very obvious model for the house.
Mm-hmm.
They're not shooting at a real mansion, and they shoot it in a way that is almost like a Rankin Bass stop motion movie during some of the model shots. And it adds this really good flavor to the whole thing.
Yeah, it looks like a dollhouse, and paired with the almost but not quite magical realism tone of the entire thing. I mean, the kid has a secret like Lost Boys / Valley Children of Thunderdome playroom hidden between the walls in his house.
Then that's like the most weird fan. Like that's like Terry Gilliam shit.
Yeah.
Or Junet and Caro. Like for a second it becomes City of Lost Children or Brazil in this weird room that he hides in. And it's just, the production design is out of this world.
But that style and tone is so heightened to the point where if this pulled the old camera pans out and this all took place inside of a snow globe trick at the end of the movie, it wouldn't feel out of place.
Or like a dollhouse.
Yeah.
Like these were his toys. Yeah. I mean, but it never does that. It sticks to its sort of universe. Even like with the mom driving home, even that feels like out of this world, like she's not in a real location. Just little things about, I mean, it's a lot of diffused photography. It's actually, the photography reminds me a little bit of what Black Christmas does with Christmas lights and stuff, where they're really, I don't know what the word is, they're kind of blown out.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of reminds me of that. And on top of that, the stuff with the mom, we keep talking about Hallmark Christmas movies. There's that subplot with the mom is this very moralistic thing where she's the successful businesswoman, but her corporate drive is keeping her from her family during the season, which is almost something lacking from Home Alone, honestly. Home Alone is all accidental. They just are ignoring Kevin. Mm-hmm. And then the sort of heart of that movie is is the mom making her way back to him. But in this case, the mom, like, her job got in the way, which is a more Christmassy thing, I think.
Yeah.
It's like her Christmas Carol moment is realizing her son might be murdered by the crazy Santa that she just fired.
Well, see, that's the really funny part of it for me, because this is probably about the third time I've seen this, and the mom's entire arc almost runs on dream logic. Mm-hmm. You know, the fact that the CEO was the one to fire him on the spot in the first place instead of some random, you know, other manager or employee on the staff to do it.
Right.
That's weird, but not totally out of place. You know, that's just kind of movie logic. But what's really funny to me is if you remove, like, she doesn't know about the killer Santa until she gets to the house. So
yeah, she just knows something's up.
She's freaking out and decides to go home early because she's called the house, you know, about 10 times and no one's answered the phone. But logically, you know, at the late hours that she's calling, the kid would already be in bed for the night, and grandpa probably would be too. So why would they answer the phone? Why are you heading home? It only works on the dream logic level of, we know the kid's in peril, so that's why she's heading home, even though she doesn't know that herself.
There's a very ill-defined thing where there are caretakers in a house that seems attached. I don't think they live in the mansion, but it's all weird, you know, model sets, so it's hard to tell. But there are caretakers, and I believe those are the only two people that the killer actually kills.
Yeah.
And in fact, we don't even see him kill them. We just see one of their bodies later.
And the dog.
Otherwise, he kills a dog, which, you know, that's a pretty horrible scene. We should talk a little bit about the killer. He is clearly suffering some sort of mental illness. And like Harry in Christmas Evil, when he's first introduced, he seems childlike. He seems to really, like, he's introduced trying to play with children, and it's not in a sinister way. And the children are just weirded out by it. And it seems like he really wants to be... He's fired because he slaps a little girl. But he slaps the little girl because she says he's a fake Santa. So there's this, like, idea that he's a child himself, and because he's this huge... And he's a really big dude. Like I said, Silent Night, Deadly Night, Billy was a big dude. This is a massive man. He's like how kids are, where kids can be really sweet until something goes wrong, and then they'll turn on a dime. And because they're little kids, they're not causing any damage. But if they were a big, massive man who got upset, they cause damage. But, like, at the same time, he does go figure out where this lady lives and go to her house to attack her family. So he's got a certain degree of agency in the situation and is planning what we think is murder. But then again, later in the movie, when he finally, and probably the coolest bit in the entire film, honestly, he finally catches the boy, and he has him with a trowel to his neck. But instead of killing him, he says, "I win. Now it's your turn to seek and my turn to hide." Which is like, it's a great twist to have your slasher killer suddenly reveal that he really just wants to play hide and seek. But it also doesn't make any sense, because he's definitely trying to kill them. And he's like, he definitely tries to kill the neighbor kid when he shows up. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they decided on what they wanted the killer to be.
If the tone weren't as heightened and wild as it was, that wouldn't work. It would almost seem like a cop-out, but because of how absolutely just fantastical the entire thing is, it's great. Like, it's one of my favorite parts of the movie.
Well, and then it leads to the best scare in the movie, which is the kid. He needs to go get... Yeah, that's right. That's how we know that the caretakers live in a different house, because they, for some reason, have the grandpa's insulin. I don't know why the grandpa doesn't have it in his room. And the kid has to run to the other house, and he tries to drive a cop car. The killer kills a cop too, doesn't he? I think he kills a cop.
Yeah, I think so.
And he tries to drive the cop car back to his house, and the killer is in the back seat, and he jumps out and screams, "You cheated!" and grabs him. And it's a great jump scare, but it's also really funny because he was hiding in the car, and he's still hiding up to the point where the kid calls in to the other police that he needs help. And that's what he's cheating, is when he's bringing in outside help. There's also a cute little scene where the grandpa and Thomas are playing a sort of variation of Dungeons and Dragons. And I do wonder if this is one of the earliest positive portrayals of tabletop gaming in a movie. Because usually it's either something like we were talking about, Mazes and Monsters, where it's a very bad thing, or it's something that nerds do that we should laugh at them for doing.
Yeah, or even if the game itself isn't evil, it's tangentially tied into some sort of fantastical horror element, like Stranger Things or something similar.
Right. I would say I liked it a lot. I think it overstays its welcome a little bit, and it switches gears maybe too many times for some viewers that will just be like, pick a lane kind of thing. But it's just so well made and so odd that I really liked it. The only other thing I would have liked more of is I think Manzor could have gone hard R with it, where he kind of goes hard PG-13 with most of the violence. And I would have liked to see, like, if you're making like I think he was still sort of aiming this at children, but not really. It's hard to describe. Nothing super violent happens to the killer. I don't know about if you would give it a PG-13 back in '88. It would probably still get an R rating, but by modern standards, it's a PG-13.
It's almost weird. Like you expect a European film like this to go harder on that front, so that this
Right.
doesn't is almost a bit of an oddity. Although that may well just be a choice on his part. I mean, I haven't seen any of his other films. I know he's done a few, but I know he also did a couple episodes of Young Indiana Jones. So tonally, that kind of fits here.
Yeah, it's said that this movie and his previous one, The Passage from 1986, that Spielberg and Lucas liked those and went to him to direct Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, which are basically movies. I mean, they're TV movies,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And probably better than you remember, listener. Some of them are actually pretty good. They're good, kind of good infotainment stuff. And he directed the one where Indy meets Norman Rockwell, and the one where he acts as a courier in the World War I trenches. And I don't remember that one too well, but I remember it being pretty harrowing for a TV movie, the infotainment TV movie. And it's a little bit like 1917, if I'm remembering right.
Probably, yeah. That not to go off on too far of a tangent, but that's an interesting series where I could see how it could be a little too dry for people nowadays, but there's a lot of interesting storytelling and filmmaking going on there. I mean, they did hire a lot of good directors, often from around the globe. Of course, you already talked about the Killer St. Nicholas movie Saint, which was done by Dick Moss, and Dick Moss did a couple episodes of that show as well, including one where Indy comes face to face with a resurrected Vlad Tepes.
Is Dick Moss? Is he the Lift guy?
Yeah, Lift and Amsterdam. Yep.
Oh, Amsterdam is fucking great, man.
So wonderful.
That's your Dutch giallo meets Miami Vice right there. That's a great movie. I don't know how it cover that on Genre Grinder. I don't know what genre that would fall under. Neo slasher. I don't know what you would even call that movie.
I guess you would have to go non-Italian gialli would probably be the way to go with it.
Yeah, which could be a thing. We covered Perfect Blue and the scariest movie moments things just recently, which I would consider sort of a Japanese animated giallo.
Definitely.
I also looked up the rest of the cast. The guy who is playing the Killer Santa is Patrick Floorsham, and he has an impressive career. He was in Diva, Jean-Jacques Binex's Diva in 1981. And these days he does a lot of voice work, which is interesting because he barely speaks in this movie. It's kind of part of the character, is that he's mostly silent. And then the boy is played by Alain Lelaine, who has developed a really impressive special effects career, which is funny because the whole thing is that the character he's playing is this sort of savant repair kid, and he does all this computer programming and stuff throughout the movie. So it's kind of fun that he ended up being a computer animator. He worked on Dark Knight, Avatar, Gravity, Black Widow, Suicide Squad, and the latest Batman movie.
See, now I
We
need to
won't.
know. Now I need to know if James Cameron has seen this movie and talked to him about it.
I mean, James Cameron's seen so many movies. I bet
I
he's
bet he
seen it.
has.
I bet he has. He's like one of those guys who like, oh, there's this obscure thing, you probably haven't seen it, and James Cameron like owns the original 35 millimeter print or something. And also the actress playing his mom, Brigitte Fossey, was a child actor herself in the 50s. And she's been in Robert Altman and Francois Truffaut movies, which is pretty cool. Oh, and also I also wrote down Manzor also directed Highlander and Red Shoe Diaries episodes.
Nice.
So he was kind of like in all of those cable, like what used to be prestige television in the 90s. This also has, I don't know how, but it got a theme song by Bonnie Tyler.
Yes.
I don't know if
insane.
she's really big in France. Like,
Maybe.
I don't think this was a huge release. It wasn't like an indie film, but I don't think it was that big a release. They use it really. It's really funny. Like the part where the kid buries his dog and he makes himself a splint and he looks longingly out the window and cries in slow motion and stuff. They said it's a song about becoming a man. And I'm sure Bonnie Tyler recorded it thinking it was a serious song, but it's used in a very comedic way in the actual film. But yeah, that's all I have on this one. Do you have any other thoughts on Deadly Games?
I just I wish we had more, not even just Christmas movies, but more magical realism children's genre fare that was just this over the top and wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I covered back a while back we did some children's horror movies, and I really do like this sort of magical realism kids movie thing that isn't afraid to get a little mature with its themes. Like this would, it's a different tone, but this would fit with something like Lady in White or Return to Oz. God, what's the Paper House? This would fit with Paper House too. It's a much more serious movie, but it would be a good double feature nonetheless. But yeah, this was the big I already knew I liked Christmas Evil, and I already knew I didn't like Silent Night, Deadly Night. So this was the surprise. This is the only one I hadn't already seen too. Maybe we should have done more that I hadn't seen, but I really want. The fourth one here we went with was one that I remember being a little better than it actually is, but it's still pretty good. It's A Christmas Tale from 2005, and that nondescript title could easily be confused with a lot of other movies. It is a Spanish movie, so maybe we should call it Cuento de Navidad to help set it apart. Or maybe we should take that even further and mention that it's part of a made-for-TV series. So its complete and full title is Películas para no dormir, Cuento de Navidad, which is the films to keep you awake. And it was directed by Paco Plaza pretty early in his career. He's a member of a group of young directors that kicked off a short-lived but really potent new wave Spanish horror thing that you kind of count Guillermo del Toro in that group, even though he's Mexican and not Spanish. But there was a brief period there where Spanish horror in the very early 2000s, where Spanish horror was like the next big thing. And he had just made The Second Name, which I've never seen, and a movie that I think is a werewolf movie called Ramasanta.
Sort of.
I'm not sure. It seems like it's like in the spirit of Brotherhood of the Wolf, from what I understand.
A little bit. It's based on a real life serial killer. It's a period.
Oh, okay.
Julian Sands plays the role, and the man thought he was a werewolf, and the movie doesn't really land on one side or the other as to whether he actually was or not. It's okay. Kind of a really not quite art house, but a little bit more serious minded than you might expect it to be.
Well, and then after that, he became more famous for co-directing Rec 2 with Yam Balaguerro, and then he solo directed Rec 3, which was the one that that breaks apart from the found footage thing. It is a pretty good movie in its own respect. Rec 4 is kind of terrible, but I like the first three. And then he directed Veronica, which I haven't seen, but everybody loves that one.
I haven't seen it either, but yeah, that's pretty universally praised, and it just had a prequel drop on Netflix as well called Sister Death. I haven't seen that either.
Cool. I didn't know that those were related. I saw Sister Death on the Netflix page, and I did not know that those were related films. That's cool. But so yeah, this was made, as I mentioned, as part of the Películas para no dormir series, the films to keep you awake, which was originally described by people on our side of the pond as a Spanish version of Masters of Horror. But it was actually a 2005-2006 revival of a 1966 series called Historias para no dormir. And this was a total of 6 movies that included this one, A Real Friend, Spectre, The Baby's Room, which was directed by everybody's favorite Alex de la Iglesia, who did Perdita Durango and Day of the Beast, and what was his TV show called?
30 Coins.
A TV show that, yes, 30 Coins. Very great guy. And then To Let, and then Blame. And Blame is interesting because it's a pro-life screed from the director of Who Can Kill a Child. The only older director in the bunch. Great director, Nachizio Ibanez Serrador. He was a part of the original series, so that's why he got to direct one. And it's just so weird seeing this pro-life horror movie from the guy who made Who Can Kill a Child. It's just the irony of it is great. So Christmas Tale. So this is a made-for-TV movie, and it's short. It's over an hour, but just barely. And it sort of skirts the line between horror movie and kids adventure. So it's kind of somewhere between Silent Night, Deadly Night, and Deadly Games. And it is ahead of the game in at least one respect, and that was it's very heavy 80s nostalgia. And there's parts of this movie that are paying such direct homage to Amblin's brand of kids adventure, but reframing it as R-rated, that it really reminds me of Stranger Things. And I seriously doubt the Stranger Things guys got their idea from this. It got a DVD release here as part of the set, but I mean, I don't think those guys had this in mind. But it is interesting to think that this movie kind of got to some of those things before Stranger Things did, at a time when we weren't quite so heavily 80s nostalgic. And then you kind of get the feeling that 80s nostalgia is going to be the basis of the entire movie at the beginning, but it's sort of a setup that leads into a more Stephen King inspired kids gang story thing, because it's much darker, and it gets dark to the point where the kids themselves are kind of the villains of the piece. I think that Plaza is using this colorful, nostalgic imagery and very whimsical, like almost disgustingly whimsical music. The basic idea is to be cynical about all this Christmas stuff and all this nostalgia stuff, and just keep making it more and more cynical as the movie goes on. So the story is that there's this gang of 5 kids who vaguely fill stereotypes that you'd find in a movie like this, and they find a woman dressed in a Santa suit, unconscious in a hole, a very deep hole near their home in sort of the rural area of this town, or suburban area, because it's supposed to look like E.T. And they go to the police, but then they discover she's wanted and on the run. So instead of telling the police and freeing her, they decide to keep her in the hole, quote, like a pet, which is like the first time you're like, oh, maybe these kids are shitty. And they cover the hole with branches and they hide her. And then they start to feed her, but she's kind of slowly dying. And then Moni, who is the only girl in the group, and she's played by the Pan's Labyrinth lead actress, Ivana Baquero. She is the only one who seems worried about what they're doing is wrong. Maybe there's this other boy who's a little bit, but then she loses interest in doing the right thing when they learn that the woman's name is Rebecca Exposito, and she is wanted for armed robbery, and she has hid 2 million pesetas somewhere. So the kids are going to try to blackmail her into giving them the money by leaving her in the hole unless she tells her where the money is. And they slowly go complete sadist. And she keeps trying to crawl out, and every time she does, she just injures herself worse and worse. and she ends up with these horrible wounds on her face, and her knee is broken, and she starts to kind of look like a monster, and she starts to kind of go insane. And so we're told she's dangerous at the beginning of the movie, but we don't necessarily know that she's dangerous. But by the end of the movie, she's definitely going to murder some children.
Almost right. I would say rightfully so, honestly.
I mean, it goes out of its way to make you hate at least two of the boys. They're really shitty little guys. And there's a point where they're arguing with the nicer kids that it doesn't matter if she lives or dies, because either way they'll either get her money or a reward for finding her body, which is super dark. I mean, I'm thinking that there is supposed to be implicit meaning here about the nature of humans that's just being put over this child's story, but I didn't quite get it. I don't know exactly what it's trying to say, if it is trying to say anything.
See, I was wondering about
and then
that.
Yeah, I feel like if I knew more about Spanish politics and more about what Paco Plaza is trying to say with some of his other movies, I just don't think the Rec movies are a good example of any sort of political filmmaking. So, but it just feels like something that there's supposed to be meaning I'm supposed to be getting from this, and I'm just not getting it.
Yeah, and
the fact that they're children.
Yeah. And then the other thing I was wondering about, because I had only seen this once before, like right when they hit DVD here in the U.S. I think I got this disc in from Netflix at the time, but back when their mail-in service was a thing.
Yeah.
But I've never seen any of the other ones, and obviously I've never seen any of the original older version of the series. So I was wondering how keyed into politics the others might be, and also if any of the others had this sort of movie within a movie aspect or not.
I can say that none of them have the movie within a movie. I mean, obviously there are politics, and like I said, Blame is pro-life, but
right.
The movie within a movie thing is the most playful part of of this film, and I feel like Plaza is sort of trying to combine all of the Spanish horror of his youth.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of Jess Franco in that there's this woman in this movie within a movie. It's I guess something zombies, the Attack of the Zombies or something like that.
Zombie invasion.
There's a sort of zombie invasion. There's this woman who is dressed like a sort of Barbarella character, which reminds me of some of those. There's a period when Franco was making Summeroo movies, A Million Eyes of Summeroo and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a character who's this sort of mad scientist type, kind of reminds me of Dr. Z. And then there's this guy who's sort of like, what if Blade was hunting zombies instead of vampires and he was a white Spanish guy? But he also has sort of that Mexican wrestler quality to him. Yeah, there's a point where the imagination factor kicks in, where those two shitty kids watch this movie and they see that there's a voodoo ceremony involving chickens that turns things into zombies, and so they try off camera to do this to the lady, so that later in the film, when they find her dead, and then they go get the authorities when she's dead, and then she's gone. Later in the film, the kids are convinced she is a zombie. And she's limping because her knee is broken and her face is all fucked up and she's gone crazy. So she's just sort of shouting at them while chasing them down. So the audience also sort of thinks she might be a zombie at this point. There's a cool this sort of showdown, which is slightly Home Alone-esque. They do a showdown at this theme park that's been closed for the season. They only really set one trap for her that looks like it's going to be super gruesome and gouge her eyes out, but it kind of misses and hits her in the temple instead, but it's still pretty gruesome. They have this sort of showdown with her, and then the boy who's obsessed with the Karate Kid, which is the thing that they reference the most, is the Karate Kid. Like, there's all sorts of generalized references to E.T. and stuff, like the fact that you never really see any of the adults' faces except for on the TV and Veronica's face. But not Veronica. That wasn't her name. Veronica's the name of anyway, Rebecca. You only see Rebecca's face and people on the TV. And then otherwise they find Paco Plaza finds ways of hiding all the other adults' faces, which is a very ET thing. But anyway, there's a kid who's obsessed with Karate Kid and trying to be the Karate Kid. And so he gets to crane kick her off a slide, and she falls and she impales her head. And at that point, the kids are like, oh, maybe she's not a zombie. I should say she's donning. The reason we're covering this is she's donning the Santa suit the whole time.
Yeah.
And it is Christmas time. So it fills our needs here. I might have been pushing it a little bit by choosing this one, but
nah, it fits. Because in the end, it does deal in naughty and nice.
Yeah, they're like it's, watching Christmas Evil or I should say Silent Night, Deadly Night, where every little slight makes him shout naughty. It's something where kids are being this naughty and they're effectively slowly killing a woman for money, and greed is, that's about as naughty as you can get.
It's a great progression because, like you said, that it's very Amblin, it's very Stranger Things at the start. So you think you're watching, a bunch of precocious Spielbergian children running around as latchkey kids whose parents are just never around, and any other adult is just not giving them the time of day for the most part. But, the twist being that they're not, precocious, sweet little Spielbergian children. They're Stephen King little shits.
Exactly. Having them do the sort of final showdown at this closed theme park is a really nice way of sort of perverting the childlike nature of everything. I really like that it's this fun, nostalgic place that it's full of danger because it's not functioning right now. And that does lead to a really good scene where the kids start talking about disposing of her body, and Moni freaks out. And it basically says, we're 12 years old. We're not supposed to be discussing the disposing of bodies. This is wrong. This isn't what we're supposed to be doing. It's like a really good self-aware moment in a movie that's otherwise not very self-aware. But I guess the movie itself, the characters aren't really self-aware.
All the kids are really well drawn. You've got there's 5 of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. 2 of them are kind of dicks from the get-go. Not as much at the start, but definitely worse as it goes along. The Karate Kid obsessive is well-meaning, but a bit of a doofus and just kind of goes along with everything. And then you have the one boy who is attempting to be nice for probably about 80% of the story, and then just finally succumbs along the way. And Moni is the one that, kind of holds fast on not being an awful little shit.
And it does pay off for her in the end.
Yes.
I guess. I do feel like the coda, I'm not sure if I think the coda is necessary. I like what they were going for with it, but I'm not sure if I like the way it turns out. The thing I really do like about it, looking back on it in the context of these other movies, is this is one where the kids actually make their own Killer Santa. Yes. It's not that a Killer Santa is being made by trauma. And it's not like some of these other movies we didn't cover where the Killer Santa is just a creature that's going to come and punish children. This is a case of someone who's a criminal, but we don't know how bad of a criminal, being driven by children to become a attempted child murderer. I think that maybe 1 or 2 of the kids should have actually died. I'll say that much of a spoiler that nobody dies. That maybe they should have killed off one of the kids just to sort of set how dangerous she is.
Probably, yeah. My memory was very hazy until I sat down to rewatch it, and I couldn't quite remember if one of the kids had bought it during the theme park chase at the end or not.
I really did. I really remembered one of them dying, but no, they don't. The woman who plays the sexy Summeru looking or Barbarella looking character in the movie within a movie is Elsa Pataki, who is apparently in a number of the Fast and Furious movies, and I'm not sure who she is.
She's the mother of Vin Diesel's child.
That's right. So she's like the character that they just sort of dump when they decide that they want Vin Diesel and Michelle Rodriguez to be a couple again.
Yeah, they paired her up with him in like 4 or 5, and then just kind of kicked her to the curb in 6, and then fridged her in 7, I think.
I can't remember.
Or 8.
I've seen them all, but
it was in 8 because retrieving the baby from the airplane was the redemption arc for Jason Statham and Luke Evans. Because you always have to have the face turn with your villains in the Fast films.
Right, because it's Dragon Ball Z. All the villains except for two become good guys at some point. She's also in Beyond Reanimator. She's the lead in that,
Oh
female
yeah,
lead.
yeah,
And unfortunately for her, she's in Dario Argento's Giallo,
yeah.
the
But
film, not
on the
the
flip
show.
side, she's also married to Chris Hemsworth. So
Oh, is she? I don't
yeah,
think I noticed that part.
yeah.
Well, there you go. Well, that's all worth it. And Beyond Reanimator, she's not bad in that movie. It's
No,
not it's
no,
not the
no,
best movie, but
no. I like her as an actress.
the last note I have on this movie is that for some reason IMDb credits George Romero as co-director,
That's
and I
weird.
cannot figure out why. I looked everywhere I could. I asked Twitter, I got no answer. I found an interview where the interviewer talks to Paco Plaza about Romero, who had just died, when he's doing a interview rounds for Veronica, and he just sort of mentions that he had talked to Romero once and got his blessing for the Rec movies. That he said he liked the Rec movies. He doesn't once mention that time where they secretly worked together. So I don't know why it's like that. I was like, do they show shots from Night of the Living Dead? They don't. There's no footage from Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I
I don't
didn't think
know.
so. IMDb has a well, I don't know if it's the case as much anymore, but there was a stretch there where they had a really bad habit of adding fan films to the writing credits of directors who also have written screenplays. So you'd go to like John Carpenter's writing credits, and there would be like 100 Halloween fan films listed underneath as based on characters by.
Baked Dust characters. Yeah, there's no. I mean, I could see him getting a writing credit even, but no, it's a co-director credit. It's very weird.
It's bizarre.
I don't think it has any. I think some editor just added that. I don't think it has
Probably.
any basis in reality. But this is streaming on Tubi, as are
Yes.
all the other movies in the set. So if you want it, if it sounds interesting, this is, I think, the best of the series. The De La Iglesia one is pretty good too.
I will say if you're wanting to look for them, you will have to look for them individually by title. You can't just punch in 6 films to keep you awake. They won't
Yeah,
pop up that way. And they don't suggest you watch the other ones after you've watched one of them, which is
yeah.
weird to me. Whatever.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a pain to find, to tell you the truth. Especially because A Christmas Story is such a generic title. Or
Oh yeah.
Christmas Tale is such a generic title. That's all I got for Killer Santas this time around. Do you have anything else to add?
Just that this made me. Of course, it was easy to spot the references to 70s and 80s American films in Christmas Tale. Not as much the Euro horror for me. There's one shot where the kid brandishes his little knife, and the angle and the reflection of it looked very Giallo killer. So that was a nice little moment. And I noticed during one of the sequences where they're watching the VHS tape of the recording of Zombie Invasion, there's a whole stack of tapes recorded off a TV that are all labeled with titles. I should have paused it to see if I could pick them out. Of course, they're all written in Spanish, so unless you know the names of specific Spanish titles for Spanish horror films, you're not going to catch them all. But Paul Nashi's La Noche del Walpurgis was in there, so that was a nice touch. But basically what I'm getting at is it made me wish it makes me want to watch more older Spanish horror than I already have, because I bet there's a whole lot more references in there that I just didn't catch.
Yeah. There's a Tombs of the Blind Dead poster in one shot.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed.
Yeah, I feel like there's probably a lot of that in there that I'm just not getting.
Yeah, well, I mean, that probably goes for the rest of the Films to Keep You Awake series, are probably full of all sorts of references that I miss, especially since I haven't seen the other ones since they first came out.
Oh yeah.
So I've expanded my Spanish horror a little bit since then. Well, then, where can the people find you to remind them of your socials and your website and all that stuff?
I am, for better or worse, still on Twitter at the moment. I have an account under my own name, but I don't really use it. I just post under the Schlocketeer account, so you can find me there. I'm also on Blue Sky. I have a Threads account, but I don't really use it. Same for Instagram. And I am on Facebook under my own name, and then my site has a page, but again, I haven't updated it recently. My day job keeps me pretty busy throughout the spring and summer and fall, but since it's winding down, I should be writing a lot more soon and have some more stuff up on there if anyone's interested. And that's just theschlocketeer.com. And of course, like I said, you can find me personally on Facebook as Daniel Baldwin.
Do you have a Letterboxd account? I can't remember.
I do, yes. And that's under my own name.
Yeah, I actually have more Letterboxd followers than Twitter followers at this point.
Yeah, my Letterboxd I update pretty religiously. So that's a good way to keep a handle on whatever nonsense I'm watching from day to day.
As usual, you can find me at the Genre Grinder Facebook, at Genre Grinder on Twitter. I should say Gabe Powers on Blue Sky. I have a little Genre Grinder in parentheses. The Genre Grinder Gabe on Instagram. The Genre Grinder website, which I am steadily updating. I got a lot of review copies the other day, and the holidays are coming, so I'm not sure how much time I'll have to finish them, but I'll be steadily trying to do at least 3 a week for a while here. Until next time, you better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. Bye-bye. You have to say bye or they think you died.
Okay. Goodbye.
It's so hard anyway to become a man. Happy birthday, Christmas. Welcome home.